A sitting U.S. president is now berating members of his own party for daring to restrain his power, and that rupture inside Washington signals a political moment we haven't seen in years. Republicans, Trump's own Republicans, are organizing against him quietly, deliberately, and on the most dangerous issue possible, the president's authority to take America to war. This isn't cable news drama. This isn't another leak designed to grab headlines. This is a group of lawmakers who've decided that loyalty has limits, and those limits just got tested. What I'm going to walk you through today isn't simple. It involves emergency powers, threats against allied nations, constitutional standoffs, and a president who treats every restraint as a personal attack. But I promise you this, by the end, you'll understand exactly what's at stake and why this moment could define how power works in America for decades to come. Let's get into it. I want you to picture something. It's late at night in Washington. Phones are buzzing across Capitol Hill. Staffers are whispering in hallways. Senators are refreshing their screens, double-checking what they're seeing because what they're seeing doesn't make sense. The president isn't attacking Democrats. He isn't going after the media. He's furious at his own party. And for the first time in a very long time, his own party is pushing back. Now, I've covered politics long enough to know the difference between theater and substance. Most so-called Republican resistance over the past several years has been performance. A concerned statement here, a furrowed brow there, then everyone falls in line and the news cycle moves on. This is different. What we're watching now is Republicans actively working to block presidential authority. Not symbolically, legislatively. They joined with Democrats to advance a war powers resolution, a formal move to restrict the president's ability to take military action without congressional approval. Think about what that means. Members of the president's own party looked at his behavior and concluded, "We need to put legal guardrails around this man before something irreversible happens." That's not a disagreement over policy. That's an intervention. And Trump's response: he didn't reach out. He didn't negotiate. He didn't try to bring people back into the fold. He raged. Reports indicate he called Senator Susan Collins a Republican who supported the resolution and bared her with crude language and threats, not persuasion, intimidation. That reaction tells you everything because when a leader responds to constitutional limits with fury rather than dialogue, it reveals how they actually view power, not as something granted by law, not as something shared with Congress, but as something personal, something that belongs to them. And that belief that power is personal property is exactly what's driving this revolt. So what actually triggered this? Let me be specific because the details matter. President Trump has been publicly floating the idea of using military force to acquire Greenland. Now I need you to sit with that for a second because when you first hear it, it sounds absurd. It sounds like a joke. It sounds like something you'd scroll past on social media and assume was exaggerated. It's not. The President of the United States has suggested repeatedly in public that military options are on the table for acquiring territory that belongs to Denmark. Denmark, a NATO ally, a country we are treaty-bound to defend. Senator Chris Murphy spelled this out plainly, and when he did, it landed like a shock wave. Because here's what most people don't understand about NATO. Article 5 of the NATO Treaty establishes collective defense. An attack on one member is treated as an attack on all members. That's the foundation of the entire alliance. It's why NATO has kept the peace in Europe for 75 years. Greenland is Danish territory. If the United States took military action against Greenland, we wouldn't just be attacking Denmark. We'd be attacking the alliance itself. Let that sink in. The scenario lawmakers are now forced to take seriously, not as theory, but as possibility, is an American president putting us in direct military conflict with Europe, with our own allies, over land acquisition. This is not normal. This is not strategy. This is the kind of rhetoric that in any other era would end a political career overnight. But we don't live in that era anymore. And that's exactly what has Republicans terrified. Because once a president starts treating military force as a real estate negotiation tool, the machinery of war begins to turn whether Congress approves or not. That's why the War Powers Act suddenly matters. That's why Republicans crossed the aisle. They weren't making a political statement. They were trying to close a door before it gets kicked wide open. To understand why this is happening, you have to understand how Trump sees the world. And I mean really understand it. Not the caricature, not the talking points, the actual operating logic inside his head. Trump doesn't think about geopolitics the way most leaders do. He doesn't see alliances as mutual commitments. He doesn't see treaties as binding obligations. He doesn't see international law as a framework that constrains everyone equally. He sees everything as a deal. And in a deal, there are winners and losers, leverage and weakness, properties to acquire and opponents to dominate. That worldview works in real estate. You can pressure a seller, you can bluff a competitor. You can walk away from a negotiation and come back stronger, but international relations aren't real estate. Countries have militaries. Alliances have tripwires. Rhetoric has consequences that can't be undone with a phone call. When you tell the world that military force is on the table for acquiring allied territory, you're not making a deal. You're issuing a threat. And threats once made change the calculations of everyone involved, allies, adversaries, and your own military commanders. Republican senators understand this. Many of them have sat in classified briefings. They've seen how quickly situations escalate. They know that words from an American president carry weight that can't be retracted with a tweet. That's why they're scared. Not because they've suddenly become liberals. Not because they hate Trump personally, but because they can see where this road leads and they don't want to be standing there when it arrives. The War Powers Act exists for exactly this kind of moment. It was designed in the aftermath of Vietnam when Congress realized that presidents had been dragging the country into wars without proper authorization. The law requires the president to consult Congress before committing troops and limits military action without congressional approval. It's an emergency brake and Republicans just pulled it. Let's go back to that phone call with Senator Collins because that call wasn't really about one vote. It was a window into something much deeper. When Trump picked up the phone and unleashed on a senator from his own party using profanity, issuing threats, treating her independence as betrayal, he revealed exactly how he processes resistance. He doesn't see it as democracy functioning. He doesn't see it as checks and balances working as designed. He sees it as personal treachery, as an existential threat. And that matters because how a leader responds to being told no tells you everything about how they'll govern when the pressure really builds. Trump's entire second-term strategy has been built on projecting dominance, total control, inevitability, the image of a man who cannot be stopped, cannot be questioned, cannot be constrained. Nothing shatters that image faster than members of your own party voting against you on national television. So he lashed out, not with arguments, not with persuasion, with intimidation. And here's what the senators noticed. It didn't work. Collins didn't change her vote. Neither did the other Republicans who crossed the aisle. They absorbed the anger, hung up the phone, and went back to their business. That moment, that failure of intimidation may be more significant than the vote itself because it demonstrated something Trump has never fully accepted. Loyalty in politics is conditional. It's based on mutual interest, shared goals, and perceived benefit. When a leader stops providing those things, loyalty evaporates. And right now, Republicans are doing the math. They're looking at the war rhetoric. They're looking at the emergency declarations. They're looking at the chaos, and they're asking themselves, what exactly am I getting out of this alliance? If the answer is nothing but risk, the alliance doesn't hold. That's the calculation happening right now on Capitol Hill, not ideology, math. Now, I need to talk about something that's happening in parallel. Because the war powers fight isn't the only front in this conflict. While Republicans were organizing around military authority, Trump made another move. He declared a national emergency related to Venezuelan oil assets. On the surface, this sounds like energy policy, securing resources, protecting American interests. But look closer. The timeline for actually benefiting from these assets years, maybe decades. The infrastructure required massive. The primary beneficiaries, multinational energy corporations, not American consumers. So why declare an emergency? Because emergencies do something very specific in American law. They concentrate power. They allow the president to bypass normal procedures. They shift authority away from Congress and toward the executive branch. Emergencies are meant for genuine crises, imminent threats that require immediate action. They're not supposed to be strategic tools for avoiding oversight. But that's exactly how they're being used. I want you to notice the pattern here. Every time scrutiny tightens, every time Congress starts asking uncomfortable questions, the temperature rises, a new emergency is declared, a new threat is emphasized. The conversation shifts from accountability to crisis management. This isn't accidental. It's a strategy. When everything is an emergency, nothing gets examined carefully. When every week brings a new crisis, last week's questions get forgotten. When the president is always fighting some urgent battle, oversight looks like obstruction. Flood the zone, change the subject, raise the stakes, hope attention drifts elsewhere. I've watched this playbook operate for years, and I'm watching it operate now. The Venezuelan oil emergency isn't really about oil. It's about control. It's about narrative. It's about keeping the machinery of government so busy responding to crises that it never gets around to the slow, unglamorous work of accountability. And that work is exactly what Trump cannot afford right now. Here's what most people are missing in all of this. While the headlines focus on war powers and emergency declarations, a quieter pressure is building underneath, and it may ultimately matter more than any of the dramatic confrontations. I'm talking about oversight, documentation, timelines, the boring procedural machinery of government accountability. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse has been asking pointed questions, not accusations questions. Why have promised document releases been delayed? Why have review timelines stretched indefinitely? Why have statutory deadlines slipped without explanation? These aren't partisan attacks. They're process inquiries. And process inquiries are what administrations fear most. Here's why. When a senator makes a speech criticizing the president, it's political theater. Everyone expects it. It changes nothing. But when a senator starts asking about Inspector General compliance, about missed deadlines, about chains of documentation, that's different. That's the beginning of a paper trail. And paper trails don't care about political loyalty. Records are stubborn. They don't disappear with a tweet. They don't dissolve at a rally. They sit in filing cabinets and servers waiting to be subpoenaed. The administration itself frames certain disclosures as priorities urgent, transparent, coming soon. The rhetoric was clear, but the reality has moved far more slowly than the promises suggested. When that gap between rhetoric and execution becomes visible, credibility suffers. And once credibility is questioned, every future explanation faces deeper skepticism. That's the trap Trump is trying to avoid. A request for an Inspector General review isn't an accusation. It's an acknowledgement that something in the process isn't working, whether through mismanagement, competing priorities, or something else entirely. But for a president who treats every inquiry as an attack, even neutral oversight feels like warfare. And that's the problem because oversight isn't optional. It's how democratic governments function. It's how power stays accountable. It's how citizens know whether their leaders are actually doing what they claim. When a president treats oversight as an enemy rather than a feature, the entire system starts to wobble. Let me tell you what Republican senators are actually worried about. It's not just Trump. It's not just this presidency. It's what comes after. Here's the thing about constitutional norms. Once they break, they don't automatically reassemble. Precedents set by one president become tools available to the next. Shortcuts taken today become standard practice tomorrow. If a president can declare emergencies to bypass Congress whenever convenient, future presidents will do the same. If a president can threaten military action against allies without consequence, future presidents will feel empowered to go further. If a president can treat oversight as sabotage and intimidate lawmakers who disagree, future presidents will inherit that playbook. Republicans understand this. The ones who've been in Washington long enough have seen how power accumulates. They know that defending a president today might mean enabling a different president tomorrow, one they don't agree with, one they can't control. That's why some of them are finally drawing lines. Not because they've had a sudden change of heart about Trump personally, but because they're thinking about the institution, about the Senate's role, about whether Congress will still matter in 10 years if they let these precedents stand. That calculation is what's driving the revolt. It's not ideological. It's structural. It's Republicans asking themselves, if we don't stop this now, will we even have the ability to stop it later? And increasingly, the answer they're arriving at is no. Once a president successfully argues that he is guided only by personal judgment, not by law, not by treaties, not by constitutional limits, the office itself transforms. It stops being a position within a system and starts being the system itself. That transformation is what some Republicans are now trying to prevent quietly, carefully with full awareness that they might fail, but trying anyway because the alternative is worse. I want to bring this down from abstractions for a moment. Because all of this, the constitutional debates, the power struggles, the procedural fights, has real consequences for real people. When a president threatens military action, military families feel it. They're the ones who get deployed. They're the ones who don't come home. When trade relationships destabilize because of erratic foreign policy, workers feel it. Factory orders get cancelled. Supply chains break. Jobs disappear. When allies lose trust in American commitments, everyone feels it. The dollar weakens. Security agreements fray. The world becomes less predictable. None of this is abstract. The rhetoric about Greenland and Denmark isn't just embarrassing. It's dangerous. It makes European allies question whether they can rely on American protection. It makes adversaries wonder if they can exploit the chaos. It makes neutral countries recalculate which side they want to be on. That erosion of trust doesn't show up in a single headline. It accumulates gradually, deal by deal, relationship by relationship, until one day America wakes up isolated in ways it never expected. And the emergency declarations, they're not just constitutional concerns, they're economic distortions. When presidents use emergency powers to direct resources toward political goals rather than genuine crisis, markets get distorted, investments get misallocated, the economy serves politics instead of people. This is what's at stake. Not just principles, not just norms, lives, livelihoods, the basic stability that allows people to plan for the future. When government becomes unpredictable, ordinary people pay the price. They're the ones who can't hedge their bets. They're the ones who depend on systems working as advertised. The Republican revolt isn't just about limiting presidential power. It's about protecting the predictability that makes normal life possible. So, where does this go from here? I'm not going to make predictions. Anyone who tells you they know exactly how this ends is lying. Politics doesn't work that way. Too many variables, too many personalities, too much chaos. But I can tell you what to watch for. First, watch the War Powers Resolution. If it actually passes with enough support to survive a veto, that's a genuine constitutional moment. It would mean Congress is reasserting authority it's let atrophy for decades. Second, watch the oversight requests, the Inspector General inquiries, the document demands, the subpoenas. If those processes continue moving forward despite pressure, it means the institutional machinery is still functioning. If they quietly stall out, that tells a different story. Third, watch the Republican coalition. Right now, the senators pushing back are a minority within their party. If that minority grows, Trump's leverage shrinks. If it stays isolated, the revolt fizzles. Fourth, watch Trump's language. When he feels cornered, he escalates. More emergency declarations, more extreme rhetoric, more loyalty tests. The more pressure he feels, the more dramatic his responses become. And fifth, this is the most important one. Watch what happens to the people who said no. Susan Collins, the other Republicans who crossed the aisle, the senators who asked uncomfortable questions. Do they face consequences? Do they lose committee positions? Do they get primaried or do they survive intact? The answer will tell you whether resistance is viable. Whether saying no to this president carries an acceptable cost. Whether the incentive structure of Republican politics has actually changed or whether this was just a temporary blip. That's what will determine whether this revolt matters or whether it's just another headline that fades away. I want to step back and ask a bigger question because this story isn't really about Trump. Not ultimately. It's about something older and more fundamental. It's about whether the rules that govern power are stronger than the individuals who temporarily hold it. Every democracy faces this question eventually. At some point, a leader comes along who believes the rules don't apply to them, who treats every limit as an obstacle, who sees the Constitution as a suggestion rather than a constraint. When that happens, the system faces a choice. It can bend, it can break, or it can hold. Right now, we're watching America's system get tested in real time. The emergency powers, the war rhetoric, the intimidation of lawmakers, the treatment of oversight as sabotage. All of it is pressure against the boundaries. And the boundaries are responding. Not as quickly as some would like, not as firmly as others would hope, but responding. Republicans crossing the aisle, inspectors general receiving requests, senators asking uncomfortable questions, votes being taken that weren't supposed to happen. That's not nothing. It doesn't guarantee the system holds. History is full of democracies that bent until they broke. That tolerated small violations until large ones became normal. That woke up one day to find the rules had been rewritten while everyone was distracted. But it's not inevitable either. Systems hold when people make them hold. When lawmakers decide their oaths matter more than their careers. When institutions prioritize function over convenience. When citizens pay attention and demand accountability, none of that happens automatically. All of it requires choice. And right now, some people are making that choice imperfectly, incompletely, but making it. That's the story underneath all the noise. Let me pull this together with the 3 things I need you to remember. First, this revolt is real. Republicans aren't just criticizing Trump in private anymore. They're taking votes. They're advancing resolutions. They're drawing lines they've never drawn before. That doesn't mean it will succeed. But it's happening and it matters. Second, emergency powers are being weaponized. The pattern is clear. Whenever scrutiny builds, a new crisis appears. The conversation shifts from accountability to emergency response. This isn't coincidence, it's strategy. And recognizing the strategy is the first step to not being manipulated by it. Third, precedents outlive presidents. Whatever happens in this conflict will shape how power works long after Trump is gone. The shortcuts taken today become the norms of tomorrow. That's why the stakes extend far beyond any single personality, or any single election. These 3 things, the revolt, the weaponized emergencies, the precedent problem are all connected. They're different angles on the same question. Can the system constrain a leader who doesn't believe he should be constrained? We're about to find out. Here's what I'll leave you with. Democracy doesn't defend itself. It depends on people. Lawmakers who take their oaths seriously. Institutions that prioritize function over politics. Citizens who pay attention even when it's exhausting. Everyone playing their part, doing their piece, holding the line. Right now, some of that is happening. Not enough, maybe. Not fast enough, probably, but happening. The resistance to Trump isn't coming from the outside anymore. It's coming from within. From people who know him, who've worked with him, who've defended him, and who've decided that some lines can't be crossed. That's significant. It doesn't guarantee a happy ending. History is full of warnings ignored, chances missed, systems that bent until they shattered. But it's a reminder that outcomes aren't predetermined, that choices matter, that individuals in the right moment can change the direction of events. We're in that kind of moment right now. What happens next depends on whether enough people in Congress, in institutions, in the public decide that the rules still matter more than any individual. That power should be constrained, not personal. That democracy is worth the inconvenience of actually maintaining it. I'll be covering this story as it develops because it's not going away and it matters too much to ignore. If this helped you understand what's happening, consider subscribing. I break down complex political developments like this regularly. No hype, no spin, just honest analysis. And leave a comment. Do you think the Republican revolt will hold, or will party loyalty win out in the end? I'm genuinely curious what you think. Thank you for watching. Stay connected, and I'll see you in the next update.